This is Revenge Kitchen. No recipes, just raw emotion and a side of karma.
The soft blue glow of multiple monitors painted Andrew Coleman's home office in ethereal light as he worked late into the Austin night. At 52, he had perfected the art of digital invisibility, a skill that served him well as a senior network security analyst. His fingers danced across the keyboard with practiced precision, monitoring network traffic for anomalies, hunting for digital ghosts in the corporate machine. "Still working, babe?" Rebecca's voice drifted from the doorway, honeyed with the slight rasp that had first attracted him 8 years ago. She stood there in her silk robe, auburn hair cascading over one shoulder, looking every bit the successful marketing director she was. Andrew glanced up from his screens, noting how the light caught the emerald of her eyes. "Just finishing up the quarterly security audit. You know how it is. The hackers never sleep." She crossed the room and placed her hands on his shoulders, her touch warm through his cotton shirt. "Neither do you, apparently. It's past midnight." He leaned back into her touch, breathing in her familiar scent, jasmine and something indefinably hers. "5 more minutes, I promise." Rebecca's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. "You said that an hour ago. Come on, Andrew. The corporate world won't collapse if you get some sleep." As she headed toward their bedroom, Andrew allowed himself a small smile. They had built something solid together over the years, a comfortable rhythm of shared dinners, weekend cycling trips through the hill country, quiet evenings reading on their porch overlooking Lady Bird Lake. At 52, he had learned to appreciate stability, to value the rare gift of a partner who understood his introverted nature and respected his need for solitude. But tonight something nagged at him, a digital itch he couldn't quite scratch. 3 weeks earlier, he had upgraded their home network security system, a comprehensive setup that would make most corporations envious. Motion sensors, smart cameras, network monitoring, encrypted communications. All perfectly legal, all designed to protect their home from the very real threats he dealt with professionally every day. The system had been sending him alerts. Nothing major, just inconsistencies in Rebecca's device usage patterns. Her phone connecting to unfamiliar Wi-Fi networks during her lunch hours. Extended periods where her location services showed her at the office, but her network activity suggested otherwise. Text message metadata showing unusual communication spikes with contacts not in her synced address book. Andrew told himself it was nothing. Rebecca was ambitious, driven. Her role as marketing director at Meridian Pharmaceuticals required her to network constantly, to build relationships with clients and colleagues. The inconsistencies were probably just work-related meetings in unfamiliar locations, new business contacts, the digital footprint of a successful professional. He had always prided himself on his ability to separate his professional paranoia from his personal life. At work, he saw threats everywhere because they were everywhere. In corporate network security, trust was a luxury that could cost millions. But at home, with Rebecca, he had learned to let his guard down. Maybe that was his first mistake. The thought came unbidden, and Andrew pushed it away as he finally shut down his workstation. Rebecca was already asleep when he slipped into bed, her breathing deep and even. He lay there in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of their shared life, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant traffic on Riverside Drive, the occasional creak of their building settling into the night. Sleep eluded him. His mind kept returning to the data patterns, the digital breadcrumbs that suggested. What? That the woman lying beside him, the woman he had built a life with, might be living a parallel existence he knew nothing about. Andrew had investigated corporate espionage cases where executives maintained elaborate double lives for years. He had seen how easily digital communications could be compartmentalized, how seamlessly people could maintain multiple identities across different platforms and devices. The techniques were simple for anyone with basic technical knowledge: separate devices, encrypted messaging apps, carefully managed social media privacy settings. But Rebecca wasn't a corporate spy. She was the woman who brought him coffee every morning exactly how he liked it, who remembered his mother's birthday when he forgot, who had held him through his father's long battle with cancer 2 years ago. Trust your data, not your emotions. Frank Chen, his mentor from his early days in corporate security, had drilled that principle into him. Frank had spent 20 years with the FBI's cybercrime division before transitioning to private sector consulting. He had seen every variation of digital deception, every method people used to hide their true activities. "The data doesn't lie, Andrew. Frank had told him during one of their regular coffee meetings at Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road. People lie, emotions lie, but data patterns, those tell you the truth. Andrew reached for his phone, the screen's brightness harsh in the darkness. Rebecca stirred slightly but didn't wake. With practiced stealth, he opened his network monitoring app. The interface was clean, professional, rows of data that most people would find incomprehensible, but that told Andrew a story. Rebecca's devices had been active until 11:47 p.m., nearly an hour after she had come to bed. Her laptop, specifically, had been accessing encrypted messaging platforms and conducting searches for restaurants in parts of Austin she never visited. The location data from her phone showed a 30-minute period that afternoon where she had been stationary at an address that wasn't her office, wasn't their home, and wasn't anywhere Andrew recognized. He closed the app and stared at the ceiling. The ceiling that they had painted together last spring, arguing good-naturedly about whether Sage Whisper or Ocean Breeze was the better color choice. Rebecca had won, as she usually did, and Andrew had to admit she had been right. The soft green hue was soothing, peaceful. But tonight, it felt like the ceiling of a stranger's bedroom. Over the next week, Andrew found himself paying attention to details he had previously ignored. The way Rebecca's phone was always face down during dinner. How she had suddenly become protective of her laptop, closing it quickly when he entered the room. The new clothes that appeared in her wardrobe, not dramatic changes, but subtle upgrades. A silk blouse here, a more expensive perfume there. "You look beautiful tonight," he told her as she prepared for what she had described as a boring client dinner. Rebecca paused in applying her lipstick, meeting his eyes in their bathroom mirror. "Thank you, you're sweet." But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and she turned away quickly to gather her purse. "Which client?" Andrew asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. "Meridian's expanding into the Dallas market. Dr. Webb wants me to schmooze some potential partners." She brushed past him, the scent of her new perfume, something with notes of sandalwood and vanilla trailing behind her. Dr. Marcus Webb. Rebecca had mentioned him increasingly over the past few months. The new chief medical officer, brought in from a prestigious position at Johns Hopkins to lead Meridian's research initiatives. Brilliant, charismatic, recently divorced. Rebecca spoke of him with the kind of professional admiration that Andrew had never heard her express about her previous supervisors. After Rebecca left, Andrew sat in his office and opened her digital profile on his monitoring system. He told himself he was just being thorough, applying the same analytical approach he used at work. If there was nothing to hide, the data would prove it. If there was something, then at least I'll know. The data painted a picture that made Andrew's chest tighten. Regular communications with a contact, identified only as MW across multiple platforms. Location data showing frequent visits to the Four Seasons Hotel during lunch hours. Credit card charges at high-end restaurants that Rebecca never mentioned. But it was the metadata from her photo uploads that finally shattered Andrew's carefully maintained denial. Photos taken at romantic restaurants, their timestamps corresponding exactly with Rebecca's claimed work dinners. But the EXIF data told a different story. Two people in intimate settings, the composition and lighting suggesting romantic rather than professional encounters. Andrew's hands trembled as he closed the laptop. 8 years. 8 years of shared dinners and weekend trips and quiet conversations about their future. 8 years of believing they were building something lasting together. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, "Dinner running long. Don't wait up. Love you." But her location services showed she was at a residential address in West Lake Hills, one of Austin's most exclusive neighborhoods, and her network activity indicated she was connected to a private Wi-Fi network registered to Dr. Marcus Webb. Andrew sat in the darkness of his office, surrounded by the soft glow of security monitors that had revealed the truth he hadn't wanted to see. Rebecca wasn't at a client dinner. She was in another man's home, living a life that had nothing to do with the woman who had kissed him goodbye 3 hours earlier. The betrayal cut deeper than he had expected. Not just the infidelity, but the elaborate deception. The careful planning required to maintain such a detailed lie. The casual way she had looked him in the eye and lied, night after night, week after week. Andrew had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to detect deception in corporate environments where millions of dollars hung in the balance. But he had been completely blind to the deception happening in his own home, with the person he trusted most. How long? The question burned in his mind. How long had this been going on? Were there others before Dr. Webb? Had their entire relationship been built on lies? He opened his laptop again and began a deeper dive into the data archives. If Rebecca thought she could maintain this double life while living under the same roof as one of Austin's top network security analysts, she had seriously underestimated her opponent. Andrew had spent his career hunting digital ghosts, tracking down hackers and corporate spies who thought they were untouchable. He had the tools, the skills, and now the motivation to uncover every secret Rebecca thought she had hidden. But as he began his investigation, Andrew made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't just uncover the truth. He would use it. He would take everything he learned about Rebecca's affair and turn it into a weapon that would destroy not just her relationship with Dr. Webb, but Dr. Webb's entire carefully constructed life. Because Andrew Coleman had learned a long time ago that information was power, and power, wielded correctly, could deliver justice. Or revenge. Sometimes they were the same thing. The next morning, Rebecca moved through their apartment with the same casual grace she had maintained for months, pouring coffee and discussing weekend plans as if she hadn't spent the previous evening in another man's bed. Andrew watched her performance with new eyes, marveling at the seamless transition between her two lives. "I'll probably need to work late a few nights this week," she said, buttering her toast with precise movements. "We're launching the new cardiac medication campaign, and Dr. Webb wants everything perfect." Dr. Webb. The name fell from her lips with practiced neutrality, but Andrew caught the slight softening around her eyes when she said it. A tell so subtle that only someone trained to notice microexpressions would have seen it. "Of course," Andrew replied, his voice equally neutral. "I'll probably be working late myself. We're implementing new security protocols across the entire network." It wasn't entirely a lie. Andrew did have work to do, just not the kind Rebecca imagined. After she left for the office, Andrew called his sister Alina. At 48, Alina Martinez had built a successful immigration law practice in Houston, and her ability to read people had served her well both professionally and personally. More importantly, she was one of the few people who had always been honest with Andrew, even when he didn't want to hear it. "You sound strange," Alina said without preamble when she answered his call. "What's going on?" Andrew found himself hesitating. Saying the words aloud would make it real in a way that data analysis couldn't. "I think Rebecca is having an affair." The silence stretched for several seconds. "What makes you think that?" "Digital evidence, location data, communication patterns, financial records, all pointing to a relationship with her boss." "Jesus, Andrew," Alina's voice carried a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "How long have you suspected?" "I've been seeing inconsistencies for a few weeks, but last night I confirmed it." "What are you going to do?" That was the question Andrew had been avoiding. The rational response would be to confront Rebecca directly, to have the difficult conversation that would either lead to couples therapy or an amicable separation. That's what a healthy, mature adult would do. But Andrew wasn't feeling particularly healthy or mature. He was feeling betrayed, humiliated, and angry. More angry than he had felt in years. "I'm still deciding," he told Alina, which was technically true. "Andrew." He turned to find Amy Patterson standing in the doorway to the balcony, holding 2 cups of coffee. His neighbor from down the hall had become a friend over the past few months, first through casual conversations in the elevator, then through shared dinners and long talks about starting over in your 50s. Amy was a veterinarian, recently divorced herself, with kind eyes and a direct manner that Andrew found refreshing after months of deception. She understood the challenge of rebuilding trust after betrayal, the slow process of learning to believe in genuine connection again. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Just reflecting on how much can change in 6 months," Andrew said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "This time last year, I thought I had my life figured out. And now?" Andrew considered the question. His relationship with Rebecca was over, but he had discovered reserves of strength and purpose he hadn't known he possessed. His work had taken on new meaning as he used his skills to investigate and expose corporate corruption. He had even started consulting with victim advocacy groups, helping them use digital forensics to build cases against predators. Now I think maybe having it all figured out was the problem, he said. I got comfortable, stopped paying attention, stopped asking the right questions. Amy nodded thoughtfully. My ex-husband used to say that marriage was like a business partnership. You work out the logistics and everything else takes care of itself. Took me years to realize that was exactly the problem. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the Austin skyline. The city was coming alive with evening energy, restaurants filling with diners, music venues preparing for the night's entertainment, the eternal pulse of a place where people came to reinvent themselves. I have something to tell you, Amy said eventually. I've been offered a position at the Animal Medical Center in Manhattan. It's a huge opportunity, but it would mean leaving Austin. Andrew felt a pang of disappointment, followed immediately by something else. The realization that Amy's potential departure mattered to him. Somewhere in the process of rebuilding his life, he had started caring about someone again. That sounds like an amazing opportunity, he said, meaning it despite his personal feelings. It is, but I've also realized that opportunities aren't just about career advancement. Sometimes they're about the connections you make, the life you build with people who matter to you. She turned to face him directly. I'm not going to take the position. I'm staying in Austin. Are you sure? I don't want to be the reason you pass up a dream job. Amy smiled. You're not the reason I'm staying. You're the reason I want to stay. There's a difference. As if on cue, Andrew's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Dr. Sarah Kim at the FDA. The web investigation led us to uncover a larger network of research fraud. We could use someone with your skills to help analyze the digital evidence. Interested in consulting work. Andrew showed the message to Amy. Looks like I might have some new opportunities of my own. Are you going to take it? Andrew thought about the question. 6 months ago, his life had been structured around avoiding conflict, maintaining stability, trusting in the narratives others constructed. Now he was being offered the chance to actively hunt down predators and expose corruption. Yes, he said, I think I am. The past months had taught Andrew that trust wasn't about blind faith. It was about continuous verification, open communication, and the courage to act when verification revealed uncomfortable truths. He had learned to trust his analytical instincts while opening himself to genuine emotional connection. Most importantly, he had learned that justice and revenge might begin in the same place, but they led to different destinations. Revenge was about personal satisfaction, a zero-sum game that consumed the seeker. Justice was about systemic change, about using personal wounds to heal broader injuries. Dr. Marcus Webb would spend the next several years in federal prison, his medical license permanently revoked, his reputation destroyed. But more importantly, his victims had found their voices, institutional policies had been reformed, and other potential predators now knew they weren't untouchable. Rebecca had disappeared into her new life in Seattle. Andrew occasionally wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, if she understood the scope of Webb's manipulation and her own complicity. But those questions belonged to a different story, one that was no longer his to write. As the Austin evening settled around them, Andrew felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine peace. Not the artificial calm of denial or avoidance, but the deeper tranquility that came from living with integrity, from aligning actions with values, from choosing truth over comfort. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Frank Chen. Saw the news about the FDA expansion of the Webb investigation. Proud of you, kid. Justice is a process, not an event. Frank was right, of course. Andrew's work was far from over. There would be other investigations, other predators to expose, other victims to protect. But he no longer felt like he was fighting those battles alone. He looked at Amy, who was scrolling through her own messages, occasionally laughing at what appeared to be updates from her veterinary colleagues. She had chosen to build a life in Austin, to take a chance on connection and community rather than chase prestige in Manhattan. Amy, Andrew said, would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere with good food and terrible privacy policies that I can explain in excruciating detail. She laughed, the sound carrying across the water toward the distant lights of downtown Austin. That sounds perfect, but I get to pick the restaurant. Deal. As they gathered the coffee cups and prepared to head inside, Andrew reflected on the strange path that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had been living a lie without knowing it, trusting in surface appearances while ignoring deeper truths. Now he was building something new, a life based on authentic connection, meaningful work, and the hard-won wisdom that came from choosing justice over vengeance. The network security analyst in him appreciated the elegant symmetry. He had spent years protecting digital systems from infiltration and corruption, only to discover that his own life had been compromised by someone he trusted completely. But systems could be rebuilt, security could be strengthened, and trust could be earned again by those willing to prove themselves worthy of it. Dr. Marcus Webb had thought he could compartmentalize his life, maintaining separate networks of manipulation and exploitation while projecting an image of professional integrity. But as Andrew had learned during his years in cybersecurity, all networks were ultimately connected. Eventually, every hidden connection would be discovered, every concealed vulnerability would be exposed. Webb's downfall had been his arrogance, his belief that his victims wouldn't fight back, that his network was secure, that his position made him untouchable. He had underestimated the power of information in the hands of someone willing to use it for justice rather than personal gain. But perhaps more importantly, Webb had underestimated the connections between his victims. When one person found the courage to speak out, others followed. When institutional failures were exposed, reforms were implemented. When individual cases of abuse were connected to broader patterns, systemic change became possible.
Enjoying the story so far? Go ahead and hit that like button. It's the kindest thing you'll do in this kitchen. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another plate of revenge.
Andrew's apartment felt different as they moved inside, not just because Rebecca was gone, but because it now reflected his authentic self rather than a performance of normalcy. The high-tech security setup remained, but it no longer felt like paranoia. It was simply prudent preparation for a world where digital threats were real and constant. "Thank you," Amy said as she prepared to return to her own apartment, "for sharing your story, for trusting me with the complicated parts of your life." "Thank you for choosing to stay," Andrew replied, "for taking a chance on Austin, on new beginnings, on whatever this is between us." After Amy left, Andrew returned to his office and opened his laptop. The screen cast its familiar blue glow across the room as he logged into his secure networks and reviewed the day's intelligence. But tonight, the data streams and security alerts didn't feel like refuge from human connection. They felt like tools for protecting and strengthening it. He opened a new encrypted message and began typing. "Sarah, I accept your consulting offer. When do we start?" As he hit send, Andrew realized that his story wasn't ending, it was transforming. The man who had been betrayed and humiliated was becoming someone who protected others from similar experiences. The skills that had revealed his personal nightmare were now weapons in the fight for systemic justice. Dr. Marcus Webb had taken 8 months to destroy Andrew's trust in human connection. But it had taken Andrew only 6 months to rebuild that trust on stronger foundations, to find love based on honesty rather than deception, and to transform personal pain into meaningful purpose. The networks were secure, the connections were authentic, and for the first time in over a year, Andrew Coleman was exactly where he belonged. Outside his window, Austin hummed with the energy of reinvention, of second chances, of lives rebuilt on the ashes of old mistakes. Somewhere in the city, other predators were operating with the same arrogance that had doomed Webb. Other victims were suffering in silence, believing they had no recourse against powerful men who seemed untouchable. But they were wrong. In the digital age, no one was truly untouchable. Information wanted to be free, truth wanted to be told, and justice, real justice, was just a few keystrokes away. Andrew smiled as he began planning his next investigation. The hunt was just beginning. After the call ended, Andrew sat in his office and considered Alina's words. She was right, of course. The smart move would be to take the high road, to end things with dignity and move on with his life. But high roads didn't account for the systematic nature of Rebecca's deception. They didn't account for the months of lies, the elaborate planning, the casual way she had made him complicit in his own humiliation. Andrew opened his laptop and began constructing what he mentally termed the complete picture. Using his professional tools and techniques, he mapped out the full scope of Rebecca's affair with Dr. Marcus Webb. The digital trail was more extensive than he had initially realized. Their relationship had been going on for 4 months, beginning shortly after Webb's arrival at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. What had started as professional meetings had quickly evolved into intimate dinners, weekend getaways disguised as business trips, and regular rendezvous at Webb's West Lake Hills home. But as Andrew dug deeper, he discovered something that transformed his anger into something colder and more focused. Dr. Marcus Webb wasn't just Rebecca's affair partner. He was a predator. Webb's digital footprint revealed a pattern of relationships with subordinates stretching back years. His previous position at Johns Hopkins had ended under circumstances that were officially described as pursuing new opportunities. But Andrew's network of contacts in the medical field suggested a different story. Harassment allegations, inappropriate relationships with female staff, complaints that had been quietly settled to avoid scandal. Meridian Pharmaceuticals had hired Webb despite these red flags, apparently seduced by his impressive research credentials and charismatic personality. They had no idea they had brought a serial predator into their corporate family. Andrew leaned back in his chair, processing this new information. Rebecca wasn't Webb's first victim, and she wouldn't be his last. She was just the latest in a series of professional relationships that Webb had corrupted for his own gratification. This changes everything. Andrew's anger at Rebecca remained, but it was now accompanied by something else, a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about his relationship anymore. This was about preventing Webb from continuing his pattern of exploitation. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. "Frank Chen speaking." "Frank, it's Andrew Coleman. I need to meet with you today if possible." "You sound serious. Everything okay?" "I'll explain when I see you. Can you meet me at our usual spot?" 2 hours later, Andrew sat across from his former mentor at a corner table in Radio Coffee. Frank looked exactly as he had when Andrew first met him 15 years ago, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the bearing of a man who had spent decades hunting digital criminals. "So," Frank said after Andrew had explained the situation, "you've discovered your girlfriend is having an affair with her boss and you want to destroy him. That about sum it up." "It's not just about Rebecca," Andrew said, though he knew Frank could see through the rationalization. "Webb is a predator. He's done this before and he'll do it again." Frank studied him for a long moment. "Andrew, I've known you for 15 years. You're one of the most ethical people I've ever worked with. But right now, you're talking like someone who's about to cross lines that can't be uncrossed." "Maybe some lines need to be crossed." "And maybe they don't." Frank leaned forward. "Look, I understand you're hurt, but if Webb is really the predator you think he is, there are legitimate ways to expose him. Professional channels, regulatory bodies, law enforcement if necessary. Which will take months or years if they act at all. Meanwhile, he continues destroying lives. And what you're proposing will be faster." Andrew met his mentor's gaze. "Much faster." Frank was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing his response. Finally, he spoke. "I can't officially endorse what you're thinking about doing, but if I were going to hypothetically advise someone in your position, I would say this. If you're going to hunt a predator, you better make sure you don't become one yourself." That evening, Rebecca returned home with flowers, a bouquet of white roses that she claimed were a thank-you gift from a grateful client. She was unusually affectionate during dinner, reaching across the table to touch Andrew's hand and asking detailed questions about his day. Andrew recognized the behavior from his study of deception patterns. The excessive attention, the guilty gifts, the performance of normalcy designed to mask ongoing deception. Rebecca was overcompensating, trying to assuage her own guilt while maintaining her double life. "These are beautiful," Andrew said, gesturing to the roses. "What did you do to earn such gratitude?" "Oh, just help them navigate some regulatory issues with their new product launch. You know how complex FDA approvals can be." Another lie? Andrew's analysis of her digital communications showed no interactions with external clients that day. The flowers had been purchased at a high-end florist near Webb's home, probably a guilty gesture after their afternoon encounter. "Well, you deserve recognition for your hard work," Andrew said, meaning something entirely different than Rebecca understood. After dinner, as Rebecca settled in to watch Netflix, Andrew retreated to his office and began phase 1 of his plan. Dr. Marcus Webb thought he was untouchable, protected by his position and reputation. He was about to learn that no one was truly safe in the digital age. Andrew started with Webb's professional credentials. Using his access to medical databases and professional networks, he began assembling a comprehensive dossier on Webb's career. The official record was impressive: prestigious education, groundbreaking research, leadership positions at respected institutions. But the unofficial record was different. Andrew's contacts in the medical field shared stories that painted a troubling picture: research assistants who had quit suddenly, female colleagues who had requested transfers, a pattern of behavior that had been whispered about in professional circles but never officially documented. Webb's personal life was equally revealing. His recent divorce had been messier than public records indicated. Andrew found sealed court documents that suggested a pattern of infidelity and emotional manipulation. His ex-wife had apparently been awarded a significant settlement in exchange for a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. How many victims? Andrew wondered as he compiled the information. How many women had Webb manipulated and discarded over the years? The next day, Andrew began Phase 2, active intelligence gathering. Using techniques he had learned during his corporate security training, he established surveillance on Webb's digital communications. Email patterns, social media activity, financial transactions, all painting a picture of a man who believed he was above consequences. Webb was arrogant, Andrew realized. He conducted his affairs with minimal operational security, apparently confident that his position protected him from exposure. He used his work email for personal communications, his corporate credit card for personal expenses, and his professional reputation to shield his predatory behavior. That arrogance will be his downfall. But as Andrew deepened his investigation, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Webb wasn't just having an affair with Rebecca. Based on his communication patterns and calendar data, he appeared to be maintaining relationships with at least 2 other women at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Rebecca wasn't Webb's primary target, she was just one of several, a diversified portfolio of manipulation and exploitation. The revelation transformed Andrew's anger into something sharper and more focused. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. Webb was systematically abusing his position to exploit vulnerable women, and the corporate structure was either unaware or complicit in his behavior. Andrew picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Dr. Sarah Kim, a former colleague who now worked in medical ethics at the FDA. Sarah had always been passionate about protecting patients and healthcare workers from exploitation. "Sarah, it's Andrew Coleman. I need to discuss a hypothetical situation with someone who understands medical ethics." By the end of the week, Andrew had assembled what he privately called the Webb Files, a comprehensive dossier documenting Dr. Marcus Webb's pattern of professional misconduct, personal corruption, and systematic exploitation of female colleagues. But having the information was only the first step. The real challenge would be deploying it in a way that would ensure maximum impact while maintaining Andrew's own operational security. Webb thought he was untouchable because he controlled the narrative. He was the respected medical professional, the accomplished researcher, the charismatic leader. His victims were just ambitious women seeking career advancement, easy to dismiss if they ever came forward. But Andrew had learned something important during his years in corporate security. Narrative control was just another form of network security, and networks could always be hacked. Andrew's plan required patience and precision, qualities that his years in network security had taught him to value over emotional satisfaction. For 2 weeks, he maintained the facade of normalcy while methodically assembling the components of Dr. Marcus Webb's professional destruction. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Webb's own arrogance. During a routine scan of Meridian Pharmaceuticals' network, something Andrew's company was contracted to perform as part of their cybersecurity services, he discovered that Webb had been using company resources for personal activities. Not just email and calendar management, but active financial transactions and personal communications stored on corporate servers. Under normal circumstances, Andrew would have reported the security breach through proper channels. But these weren't normal circumstances. Instead, he carefully documented every violation while maintaining perfect operational security. Webb was unknowingly providing the ammunition for his own downfall. The most damaging discovery was a folder on Webb's corporate laptop titled Research Notes, a folder that contained nothing related to pharmaceutical research. Instead, it held a detailed catalog of his relationships with female colleagues, complete with photos, personal information, and what could only be described as a predator's scoring system. Rebecca was listed as Target 3, engaged but vulnerable, requires careful manipulation. Her entry included details about Andrew's work schedule, their relationship dynamics, and Webb's strategy for exploiting what he perceived as weaknesses in their partnership. Andrew stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. Webb hadn't just seduced Rebecca. He had studied her, analyzed her, treated her like a case study in manipulation. The clinical detachment of the language was somehow more enraging than the betrayal itself. But it was the other entries that transformed Andrew's personal anger into something larger. Target 1 was Dr. Lisa Park, a junior researcher who had apparently been coerced into a relationship under threat of professional retaliation. Target 2 was Jennifer Walsh, a marketing coordinator who had filed a harassment complaint that was mysteriously withdrawn after a private meeting with Webb. There were more, 8 women in total, each catalogued with the same clinical precision. Some were current relationships, others were marked as completed or terminated. All were Meridian employees who worked under Webb's direct or indirect authority. Andrew downloaded the entire folder onto an encrypted drive, then began the careful process of cross-referencing Webb's documentation with official records. What he found painted a picture of systematic abuse enabled by corporate negligence. Several of the women had filed complaints that were either dismissed or resolved through private settlements. One had left the company entirely after what personnel records described as a voluntary resignation, but Webb's notes suggested she had been forced out after refusing to continue their relationship. This has to stop. But Andrew's plan went beyond simple exposure. Webb's crimes weren't just personal. They were professional, financial, and potentially criminal. Andrew intended to ensure that every aspect of Webb's corruption was revealed simultaneously, creating a cascade of consequences that would be impossible to contain or spin. He started with the financial violations. Webb had been using company funds for personal expenses, dinners with his targets, gifts, hotel rooms for his affairs. The amounts were relatively small, but they constituted clear cases of fraud and embezzlement. Next, he focused on the research misconduct. Webb's actual pharmaceutical research was riddled with ethical violations, manipulated data, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and plagiarized work from colleagues. The brilliant researcher reputation was built on foundations of sand. Finally, there were the regulatory violations. Webb had been conducting unauthorized trials of experimental medications, using his position to access drugs that hadn't been approved for human testing. He had been experimenting on himself and possibly others, documenting the results in encrypted files that he thought were secure. How did no one see this? Andrew wondered as he compiled the evidence. But he knew the answer. Webb was charismatic, well-connected, and skilled at compartmentalizing his activities. He had created separate spheres of corruption that never intersected in ways that would trigger systematic investigation. Until now, Andrew's plan called for simultaneous disclosure to multiple regulatory bodies, professional organizations, and law enforcement agencies. But he needed insurance, a way to ensure that the information would reach its intended targets even if Webb tried to use his influence to suppress it. That insurance came in the form of Dr. Amanda Foster, an investigative journalist who specialized in medical ethics scandals. Andrew had followed her work for years, admiring her thorough research and fearless reporting. She would be the perfect vehicle for ensuring public exposure. On a Friday afternoon in late October, Andrew put his plan into motion. At 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time, comprehensive dossiers were simultaneously delivered to the FDA's Office of Inspector General, the Texas Medical Board, the FBI's White Collar Crime Division, Meridian Pharmaceuticals Board of Directors, Dr. Amanda Foster's encrypted email account. Each dossier was customized for its recipient, highlighting the violations most relevant to their jurisdiction while providing the complete picture of Webb's systematic corruption. But Andrew's masterstroke was the timing. He had discovered that Webb was scheduled to present research findings at a major medical conference that weekend, a presentation that would significantly enhance his professional reputation and potentially lead to a lucrative consulting contract. By Monday morning, Webb's presentation would be remembered not for its scientific merit, but as the last public appearance of a disgraced predator. Andrew spent the weekend monitoring the fallout from his home office. The first response came from Meridian's board of directors, who moved with surprising speed to place Webb on administrative leave pending a comprehensive internal investigation. By Sunday evening, the FDA had launched their own inquiry into Webb's research practices. But it was Dr. Foster's article, published online at 6:00 a.m. Monday morning, that delivered the knockout blow. Predator in the Lab: How One Doctor Abused His Power to Exploit Colleagues and Patients was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Foster had worked through the weekend to verify Andrew's information, conducting interviews with Webb's victims and uncovering additional evidence of misconduct. The article didn't just expose Webb's crimes, it contextualized them within the broader culture of harassment and abuse in academic medicine. Foster had used Webb's case as a lens for examining systemic failures that enabled predators to operate with impunity. By 10:00 a.m., the story had been picked up by major news outlets across the country. Webb's professional life was in ruins, his reputation destroyed, his career effectively over. Andrew felt no satisfaction watching Webb's downfall, only a hollow sense of justice served. The man who had systematically destroyed lives had finally faced consequences for his actions. But there was still one more confrontation to face. Rebecca returned home that evening visibly shaken. She had spent the day dealing with the chaos at Meridian as Webb's scandal engulfed the company. Several employees had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and the entire corporate leadership was in crisis mode. "It's horrible," she told Andrew as they sat in their living room. "I can't believe Marcus. Dr. Webb was capable of something like this. All those women." Andrew watched her performance with clinical detachment. Rebecca was maintaining her innocent facade even now, pretending she had been unaware of Webb's nature. But Andrew had seen Webb's files. He knew Rebecca had been aware of at least some of the other relationships. "You worked closely with him," Andrew said carefully. "Did you ever suspect anything?" "Of course not," Rebecca replied, perhaps a little too quickly. "I mean, he was charismatic and charming, but I never imagined. This is just devastating for everyone at the company." "Yes," Andrew agreed, "devastating." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken truths filling the space between them. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "Andrew, I need to tell you something. There's going to be an investigation, and they're going to want to interview everyone who worked with Marcus. I just want you to know that there might be some questions about my relationship with him." "Here it comes." "What kind of questions?" Rebecca took a shaky breath. "I think some people might have gotten the wrong impression about us. We worked closely together, and maybe some colleagues misinterpreted our professional relationship as something more personal." Andrew marveled at her ability to construct lies even when her world was collapsing. She was still trying to control the narrative, to minimize her involvement and preserve her relationship with Andrew. "I see," Andrew said, "and was there anything to misinterpret?" "Of course not," Rebecca said, meeting his eyes with practiced sincerity. "You know I would never betray our relationship like that." The words hung in the air between them, a final lie in a relationship built on deception. Andrew felt something break inside him, not his heart, which had been broken weeks ago, but his last hope that Rebecca might find the courage to tell him the truth. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I know about the affair." Her face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally resignation. For a moment the mask slipped, and Andrew saw the real Rebecca, tired, cornered, and finally caught. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Weeks. I know about the hotel meetings, the restaurant dinners, the times you've been to his house. I know everything." Rebecca sat in silence for a long time, apparently processing the implications. Finally, she spoke. "Are you going to leave me?" The question surprised Andrew with its directness. No apologies, no explanations, no attempts at justification. just the practical consideration of consequences. "I think we both know this relationship is over," Andrew said. "The question is how we handle the transition." What followed was the most civilized breakup conversation Andrew had ever experienced. They discussed logistics, lease agreements, shared possessions, financial arrangements, with the cool professionalism of business partners dissolving a corporation. Rebecca packed her essential belongings that night and moved into a hotel. Within a week, she would resign from Meridian Pharmaceuticals and relocate to Seattle, where her sister lived. The investigation into Webb's misconduct had created too much scrutiny for her to remain in Austin. Andrew never told her about his role in exposing Webb. As far as Rebecca knew, her affair partner had been brought down by random whistleblowing or internal investigation. She never suspected that the man she had deceived was the architect of her lover's destruction. 6 months later, Andrew sat on his apartment balcony overlooking Lady Bird Lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. The space felt different now, lighter somehow, freed from the weight of lies and hidden truths. The fallout from the Webb scandal had been extensive. Dr. Marcus Webb faced criminal charges for fraud, research misconduct, and sexual harassment. Meridian Pharmaceuticals had settled multiple lawsuits and implemented new policies to prevent future abuse. Several other institutions had quietly removed Webb from honorary positions and research collaborations. Most importantly, several of Webb's victims had found the courage to come forward publicly, inspired by the exposure of his systematic predation. Their testimonies had led to additional investigations and had sparked broader conversations about power dynamics in academic medicine. Andrew's role in Webb's downfall remained hidden, known only to Frank Chen and Alina, both of whom had helped him navigate the ethical complexities of his actions. He had used his skills to expose corruption and protect victims, but he had also acted from personal motives that complicated any simple moral calculation. Was it justice or revenge? Andrew still wrestled with that question. Perhaps the distinction mattered less than the results. A predator stopped, victims protected, systems exposed and reformed.
The story's over, and now it's your turn. Was that justice? Comment your thoughts, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.